Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Did You Know? And we're continuing to learn about sentences. So these are brief lessons that aim to remind you of key concepts in English. Now, when you're watching and listening, it's important to be active as learners. So any tasks I give you, any thinking tasks, please do those, as you are more likely to retain the information than if you just passively listen. Feel free to use a pen and paper if you want. Okay, so moving on, let's get started. This is Paul Grice. He was a linguistic theorist, which means he studied how language works. And he came up with different rules for spoken language. So we're looking at, I guess, written language and spoken language when we look at sentences. We're going to apply what he said about language to sentences because I think it links nicely to the ingredients of a sentence actually and what we want to get from our sentences. And what we're learning today, or what I'm reminding you of, is the key ingredients of a sentence. So, this theorist did not study sentences in the way we are right now, but his statement about spoken language between two people in a conversation, so dialogue, links nicely to what our sentence recipe. So the main idea that I want to take from him is this cooperative principle. Speakers in conversations naturally follow this rule. They must be truthful, relevant and unambiguous. So relevant means on topic, unambiguous means clear. So that's what he said about rules we automatically follow when we're having a conversation. Moving on. So how do we apply this to sentences? Well, our sentences must be clear. That's the main purpose of why sentences exist. We want our thoughts to make sense. How do we make that, though? That's what we're thinking about today. How do we make our sentences clear? Well, English uses nouns and verbs, and many other languages. Can't speak for all languages, but I know most other languages do use that as well. So if you study Spanish, French, German, any of those languages, you'll see nouns and verbs come up a lot too, maybe in different forms. They might have slightly different places in the sentence, but they will be there. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to try out thinking of your own sentences, and we're going to see where those nouns and verbs come up. So I don't want you to necessarily try to think desperately to think of a noun or a verb. I just want you to think of some simple sentences. So here is a reminder of what nouns and verbs are. So a noun is a person, place, object and or emotion, and a verb is a word that suggests an action. Now in a minute I'm going to ask you to think of some specific sentences. So just hang on until we get to the next slide. Just a note about these definitions of nouns and verbs. Very basic for the purposes of today. And we will explore the different ways in which you might see nouns and verbs, different words that you perhaps don't expect to be nouns or verbs, and their different roles where you put, according to where you put them in the sentence. Okay, so let's go back to you. Let's hand over to you. So I want you to think of 3 sentences. Here we go. Number 1, think of a clear sentence about breakfast. So do that now. Number 2, think of a clear sentence about swimming. So clear, not too long. Number 3, think of a clear sentence about cats. The nation's most loved or hated animal? I can't quite decide. Some people love them, some people really hate them or are scared of cats. Can be a bit creepy, can't they? If you're finished, think about the sentences on the right. What connects your sentences? Are there any similarities? Can you spot the nouns and the verbs in them? Or can you find them? Are there any similarities in the order of the words? Okay, so we're going to move on to 3 sentences I've come up with. So you can see, I ate porridge with blueberries for breakfast. That is a fact. I did do that and I highly recommend it. But more importantly here is the fact that that sentence contains a noun, or actually contains more than one noun, but it contains a noun that we call a subject and a verb. So I is the subject, so the noun that is doing the action. And you can see the same with she adores swimming. She is the noun that is doing the action. That makes the subject of the sentence. And in my final sentence is about cats. Cats are evil, but they are also, they are fluffy and cuddly. You can see we've got 2 subjects, 2 nouns doing an action, and 2 verbs. And that actually is a compound sentence. So that is 2 simple sentences. So 2 sentences with 1 noun, 1 verb, 1 subject, 1 verb joined together, usually by the word. By a word like but. But we'll go through that. I'll remind you of those later. They're not too hard to understand, so we will need to whiz through them just because it's useful for when we're thinking of complex sentences later. Okay, so thank you for listening. We're at the end now. There is a quiz in the comments. Do take it because that will ensure your learning is consolidated. It is stuck into your head, it sticks. And in part 3, so the next slide, set of slides, we'll look at how you use simple sentences for effect in descriptive writing and when putting forward a point of view, which is what which is the type of writing you'll be doing in the English language papers for GCSE. So it has a nice direct link. So goodbye from me. Notice I've used yours faithfully because I'm not quite sure of everyone's name who is listening to this. Bye.